let's get started with the story about Antony Blinken and China. So it was just a couple of days ago. Antony Blinken was visiting China. He had to have some words with Xi Jinping. And, you know, it's really interesting that after that conversation, now Antony Blinken is making accusations against China. And these are going to sound familiar to you because our government has already made these accusations towards Russia. Now they're trying to blame China for the same thing. Remember, it is election year. Get ready for it, folks. He's the first on this right now, but he won't be the last. Don't be surprised if Hillary Clinton starts to repeat the same talking points. Let's get it.
All right, we do have breaking news. Very shortly, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will head back to the United States after key meetings in China, including with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The secretary just spoke to CNN national security correspondent Kylie Atwood moments ago. Kylie joins us from Beijing. Kylie, what did he tell you?
Well, listen, he said these conversations were certainly better than his conversations with Chinese officials that happened here in Beijing 10 months ago. And that's because he said they were forthright about their differences. But one major point of tension between the U.S. and China that will only grow in the coming months is concerns about China meddling in U.S. elections. Listen to our conversation on that topic.
So as you can see, they've already started. It's election year. Joe Biden is up for re-election. So you see the narrative that they're already starting to spin. Now they're no longer saying that it's Russia that is influencing in U.S. elections. Now they are accusing China. They're starting early. It's still April. So remember this moment, because if Joe Biden loses re-election in November, you already know where they're going to put some of the blame, at least. We'll get into where they're going to put the rest of the blame.
I want to ask you about a commitment that CNN has reported President Xi made to President Biden when they met in November. We've reported that he told President Biden that China would not interfere in the upcoming presidential elections in the United States. But since then, there have been reports of online Chinese accounts that have falsely mimicked Trump supporters. Do you believe that these accounts violate President Xi's commitment?
Pause. Before he even responds to that question, where did that report come from? So you notice how they're leaving this piece of information out. I think it's really important. She says there have been reports that China is, I guess, trying to escalate Trump accounts or pretending that there are Trump accounts out there or whatever. Who made that report? Where did that information come from? Because you see, we can't just take their word, especially CNN. We'll get into all that. But CNN has been known for lying. Mainstream media is known for lying. So notice how a lot of people who are not paying attention to how media works and they're not watching independent media, they'll probably just watch this and think nothing of it. What she just said. Where did that report come from? Who made that report? Those are the questions that we need to ask. Now watch this.
What I can tell you is this. President Biden was very clear about that with President Xi, and I repeated that today in my meetings.
You repeated what?
That any interference by China in our election is something that we're looking very carefully at and is totally unacceptable to us. Look, it's something we're tracking very carefully. I can't speak to these specific reports. I can say that as a general matter, we've been very clear with China, don't do it.
But they're not violent.
Pause, and then we'll come back a little bit here. Okay. So first and foremost, can I just chime in here for a second? Newsflash, China is not thinking about us. China is not walking around thinking about U.S. politics. They could care less because they don't really need us. We need them more than they need us. This is the thing I never really understood. For the U.S. politicians that continue to smear and attack China and tend to, I guess, push and increase tensions with China, it doesn't make any sense because we are not at a point in this country where we're producing enough manufacturing in this country on our own that we don't need China. Okay, so starting some type of conflict with China actually is going to hurt American interests. It's actually going to hurt the American economy because we depend on them so much for products and goods and services and manufacturing. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that going back to the Clinton administration, they decided to send U.S. jobs overseas to China. But it's not just China. There's Mexico as well. We have auto parts that are made in Mexico, and now it's like the government wants to punish these countries because they became successful when you sent the jobs there. So think about that. That is what this is really about. But China is not thinking about us. We are not that important to them. We talk more about them than they talk about us. Danny Haifong is in China right now. Whoops. Danny Haifong is in China right now. Go look at Danny Haifong's Twitter page of his experiences in China. I believe he's also streaming. He was streaming while he was there as well. Go look at his video so you can see what it's actually like. They're not thinking about us.
We've been very clear with China. Don't do it.
But they're not violating the commitment yet, as far as you can tell?
Well, again, I'd have to look at the specific reports that you're referring to, but we have seen, generally speaking, evidence of attempts to influence and arguably interfere, and we want to make sure that that's cut off as quickly as possible.
So he tells on himself here because he's telling you that he hasn't even looked at the reports that she's referring to. But he said they know that there have been attempts of China influencing the presidential election, but he hasn't looked at the reports.
Now, it is noteworthy that he said that there is evidence of China attempting to influence and arguably interfere in U.S. elections just months after President Biden and President Xi had that conversation. It's clear that China is not heeding those warning calls from the United States. He also said that it's the concern that China is seeking to mirror what Russia is doing in terms of influence efforts in the United States, trying to sow division that are already apparent in the U.S.
So here they are still pretending like Russiagate was a thing after Russiagate has been debunked multiple times. If Antony Blinken is claiming that China is doing that, where is the evidence? Where is it? There is no evidence. They don't have any proof. They're already setting the stage for the reaction that is going to come if Joe Biden loses re-election. That is what this is about. They're not willing to admit publicly that a lot of Americans want to support Donald Trump again, and that some Americans who did not support Donald Trump in 2016 or 2020 want to support him in 2024. They don't want to admit that because admitting that means that you have to acknowledge that the Biden administration has failed. And that's the administration that he works for. That's the administration that he is a part of. So you got to remember, this is a job for Antony Blinken. So Antony's trying to make sure that he keeps his job and he stays in the social circles that he's in.
Evidence that they tried to influence and maybe interfere in the elections. Terrific to have you here, Kylie. Thank you so much for sharing this breaking news reporting.
Well, for more, Mark Stewart joins us live from Beijing. Good to see you, Mark. So the Secretary of State certainly sent a strong message to Chinese officials about its support for Russia, the US saying that it's enabling Russia to continue its brutal war in Ukraine.
Right, Linda, this relationship is among the top issues for Secretary Blinken. It's something that we anticipated he would bring up, and he certainly did. You know, China contends, if we look at the war between Russia and Ukraine, China contends it's a neutral partner, but American officials feel otherwise. They believe that China is helping Russia and its defense industry, helping it to ramp up production of things such as armored vehicles and of tanks. These concerns were once again reiterated by Secretary Blinken when he met not only with Xi Jinping, but also with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and said that there could be additional action taken. Already, there are sanctions levied against China. This comes at a time, Linda, when we have seen a relationship really blossom even further between China and Russia, especially as China tries to portray itself as an alternative, a different way of viewing the world than the United States. And
You hear that? That's the big problem. China presents itself as an alternative, and our government doesn't want you to have an alternative. They want you to have the status quo, and that's it. That's it. You can see this from the way that they implement certain policies. That's what they want you to have. China can have a relationship with whoever they want. The United States government doesn't own China. That's just like, let's pretend that like you're friends with someone. Let's say you have a best friend, right? And then it's like, I don't know, like all of a sudden it's a new year at school and you meet another person and you guys become friends too. And then it's like, the best friend that you had earlier or whatever, now they're kind of jealous and pissed that you got another friend, as if you can only have a relationship with that person. They can engage with whoever they want. China and Russia are both a part of BRICS. They are exploring the idea of a multipolar world, which honestly makes sense, where there's no head at the table, where there is horizontal organization. What is wrong with that? The US government has a problem with that because they are the ones that police the world and want to continue to police the world. They want to be at the top economically. They don't want any other country to threaten that. Now, I want you to hear the way that Fox News actually spoke about this, because this is a doozy. So they're talking about Blinken's trip to China. And then I told you before, when it comes to certain countries, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are totally fine demonizing that country. And they're totally fine supporting certain countries. Both parties support the state of Israel, even though they're committing genocide. Because those politicians are funded by AIPAC. They're funded by the Israeli lobby. Both parties support demonizing China and Russia. So think about that, folks. They're not as different as you think. Listen to the way that Fox News broke this down. The
same thing. And please don't compete with us, because we don't want the United States to be competing with China, which is exactly what we should be doing. I'm calling for us to start decoupling from China. China is our greatest adversary. Look at this whole thing about fentanyl. You know that China actually incentivizes chemical companies in China to produce the chemicals that produce fentanyl. Now, mind you, they're illegal in China. They can't sell it in China, but they can do it overseas. And so they are poisoning tens of thousands of Americans every single year with the poison that they're sending over here, and the Chinese government is actually incentivizing it.
Pause. So now the way that they're going to try to get the American people to despise China is because they're going to accuse China of poisoning people in the United States. This is how far they're willing to go, folks.
Please stop doing that. Words don't work with China. Action works with China, and that's the only thing that works with China.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Secretary of State says in the coming weeks, China and the U.S. will hold talks over artificial intelligence. What do you think will come out of those talks?
Nothing good for the United States, because this administration is unbelievably weak, and Secretary Blinken is probably the worst Secretary of State we've ever had in the history of the United States. And there's no concession that he won't give up in the name of, sometime maintaining some kind of peace. And so, no, I don't have very high hopes for any discussion between this administration and China over AI. We have to win the race to AI. It's critical to our national security interests.
Yeah.
So do you see the way that they speak about other countries that are performing well economically, or they consider to be an economic competitor? And they'll never come out and say it this way, right? Actually, maybe I think Trump actually did say it this way. Trump said the quiet part out loud. That's one of the reasons why they didn't want Trump to stay in there. Like, no, you're not supposed to tell them that. But do you see how the length that they're willing to go to destroy another country that's doing well economically? Top 10 banks in the world. China has banks in the top 5. It wasn't this way decades ago. So the U.S. government has been paying attention to that. Corporations, U.S. corporations have been paying attention to that. Wall Street is paying attention to that. This idea that only the United States can be the one, they're talking about AI. No, we have to be the one to beat them to the race of AI. Okay, so let's say that does happen and something goes wrong with AI, which it probably could. Who are they going to blame then? Can't blame anyone but ourselves. We have to be the first to do this. We have to be the ones. No other country is allowed to pursue this. This is where we are now. The United States government doesn't want to be allies. They want to be foes. They don't want to work together. Their idea of working together with these countries is to bully them into doing what they want them to do. That's their idea of working together. I'm going to tell you what you are going to do. And if you don't do what I'm going to do, then our country is going to implement sanctions on your country. And this has been going on for years.
And you talked about being strong with the Chinese. Former President Trump, it took about 2 years for him to force those changes. He slapped huge tariffs on Chinese goods and as well as technologies and banned some technologies from going over there before getting that phase 1 trade deal. Do you think the Biden administration can have enough strength to stand up and get something from China this year?
Absolutely not. Look, one of the things what they talked about was, hey, quit flooding the market with solar panels and electric vehicles. Well, what are we heading into? Solar panels and electric vehicles. So on one side, they're saying, hey, stop flooding the market that way. And yet they're demanding more solar panels and electric vehicles here in the United States and frankly, destroying our domestic energy production. And so, look, never, ever listen to the Biden administration. You got to watch what they're doing. All right. What they're doing is much more important than what they're saying. They may be saying the right things, but their actions speak otherwise. Their actions always run counter to American interests.
You can say that about any presidential administration. And we can also say that about Fox News and you, sir, as well. Seriously, politicians. Now, I want to show you a little bit more about Antony Blinken's speech when he visited China. Listen to this. Again, already threatening them. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled to Beijing to lecture China and threaten consequences for the continued supply of dual-use technology to Russia. While the U.S. supplies bombs, bullets, and fighter jets to Israel to carry out the Gaza genocide, for the global South, the U.S. naked hypocrisy is on full display. What they really want China to do, here's the thing, if China were supplying weapons to Israel, the U.S. government would have no problem with that. If China were working hand in hand with Israel, Antony Blinken would be totally fine with that. But because China is choosing to work together with Russia, that is what they find to be problematic. Listen to this.
I reiterated our serious concern about the PRC providing components that are powering Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. China is the top supplier of machine tools, microelectronics, nitrocellulose, which is critical to making munitions and rocket propellants, and other dual-use items that Moscow is using to ramp up its defense industrial base. A defense industrial base that is churning out rockets, drones, tanks, and other weapons that President Putin is using to invade a sovereign country, to demolish its power grid and other civilian infrastructure, to kill innocent children, women, and men. Russia would struggle to sustain its assault on Ukraine without China's support. In my meetings with NATO allies earlier this month, and with our G7 partners just last week, I heard that same message. Fueling Russia's defense industrial base not only threatens Ukrainian security, it threatens European security. Beijing cannot achieve better relations with Europe while supporting the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War.
Why does China have to secure better relationships with Europe? Because the U.S. government says so?
As we've told China for some time, ensuring transatlantic security is a core U.S. interest. In our discussions today, I made clear that if China does not address this problem, we will. I also expressed our concern about the PRC's unfair trade practices and the potential consequences of industrial overcapacity for global and U.S. markets, especially in a number of key industries that will drive the 21st century economy, like solar panels, electric vehicles, and the batteries that power them. China alone is producing more than 100% of global demand for these products, flooding markets, undermining competition, putting at risk livelihoods and businesses around the world.
Undermining competition, he says, right, in reference to China. But then this goes back to the issue of capitalism. Isn't that just a part of capitalism? Because you see, what I've noticed time and time when a lot of people like Antony Blinken and other economists that say that they are a capitalist and they support that type of market system, they seem to be totally fine with it until another country starts to beat us at doing it, particularly if it's a country that we're not very fond of, like China. So maybe you should call out the problem with capitalism, but he won't do that. Let me show you something that is said at the very bottom of the screen here. I think this is important. You guys notice this right here? And pull back. Blinken, she wants to see more U.S. students in China. Oh. Think about that for a second. Now, I have, for one, have recommended that U.S. students, if you don't want to end up in a world of student loan debt, that if you can do so, to study abroad. I've been saying that for quite a long time. But now another issue that Blinken has is that they're trying to encourage U.S. students to study in China. I say go for it. Chinese students come to the U.S. and study in the U.S. Why can't American students study in China? The U.S. doesn't want any country to succeed but them. And China has chosen to respond to Blinken's visit. And I think this is very interesting. Check this out, guys. Let me make this a little bigger. China calls for UN-led international probe of the Nord Stream blast. This was released April 27th, just yesterday. A Chinese envoy on Friday called for a UN-led international investigation of September 2022 Nord Stream pipeline explosions. It has been more than 18 months since the Nord Stream incident. It is simply regretful that no conclusion has been drawn. China's deputy permanent representative to the UN made that statement. His name is Ji Shang. China notes that Sweden and Denmark, two major parties to the incident, announced in February 2024 the termination of their country-specific investigations. The two countries' investigations did not disclose substantive information, did not reveal concrete progress, and did not draw clear conclusions, sparking even more speculations and misgivings in the international community. The Nord Stream pipeline explosions were a serious incident that sabotaged transnational energy infrastructure. Since the explosions, the Security Council has considered the issue on many occasions, and many council members, including China, have been calling for an objective, impartial, and professional investigation to find out the truth as soon as possible and to bring perpetrators to justice in order to prevent the reoccurrence of similar incidents. So this is China's way of clapping back at Antony Blinken. This was released right after his visit. So China's response to the U.S. government is, okay, you want to come over here and try to tell us what to do? We are going to call on the UN to lead an investigation into the Nord Stream blast. And that is because China, and like other countries, and those of us that have been paying attention here in the United States and have paid attention to investigative journalism, and the Gray Zone had debunked the story that the US government told about the Nord Stream pipeline blast. And that is the fact that there are only one or two people that were probably involved in this, because we know that Russia did not blow up their own pipeline. That was either the United States or Ukraine, and most likely the United States. So we will see how this goes, folks. We will see how this goes. But calling for that investigation is very crucial, because it's kind of like a slap in Blinken's face. Like, he went there and said, listen, you cannot be supplying these weapons to Russia, and this is what you need to do. And China goes, okay. And then as soon as he leaves, we're going to try to work with Russia even more. We're going to try to get to the bottom of this Nord Stream blast. We are going to try to expose the United States government to the world for what it really is. We'll have to stay tuned to see what happens. But it's getting interesting, folks. They are already leading with the narrative that China is trying to interfere in the 2024 election. They moved on from Russia to China. It'll be China Gate.